Revolutionary greetings, comrades. We are still discussing the proposal that we are putting forward on Zimbabwean domestic workers who are not documented. One thing that as communists we should not do is to run away from any discussion on the matter. We need then in this video to clarify certain issues because in some quarters we have been accused of advocating for the scratching of the minimum wage in South Africa. That is not the intention. This is how our proposal is. Firstly, we are saying the majority of these undocumented, though others prefer to call them illegal immigrants, but for this purposes of this discussion, we use the word undocumented. Undocumented migrants get employed as domestic workers, and we are talking of domestic workers who are already employed. We are not calling for the opening of borders or floodgates, if you like. We are saying, though we do not have a number, let's just assume you have 10,000 domestic workers that work in South Africa undocumented of migrants' origin. These are the ones that were advocating for special permits to be granted to them because they work for the South African middle class, which in the previous video we have said the understanding the condition of the South African middle class and also understanding the condition of this migrant worker, right? The minimum wage at 25 rand, right? If the minimum wage is 25 rand and a person as a domestic worker works for 8 hours in 6 days, they are supposed to be paid 4,800. Right. This domestic worker does not stay at the workplace. There are many that work as domestic workers. They do not stay at the workplace. From the 4,800 that they earn per month, which is the minimum wage, they have to pay their rent where they stay. Rent differs whether you stay wherever one stays, but one has to subtract the rent. Secondly, one has to subtract transport. Right, and obviously, if the family stays with family, meals, right, groceries. So now, a domestic worker who does not stay at the workplace earns 4,800 rands, which is the minimum wage. If we calculate for 8 hours in 6 days, which is 25 rands. So this domestic worker earns at 4,800 rands. From the 4,800 rands, there is transport involved. There is also rentals involved. We are not counting groceries, right? But a domestic worker who's undocumented, and the boss who's the middle class says, I cannot afford to pay the minimum wage, right? I cannot afford to pay the minimum wage. I can pay you in between, which we are using 18 rand per hour, right? As an example, some might go to 17 rand or 16 rand, but we are using 18 rand per hour instead of 25 rand. So this undocumented domestic worker stays at the workplace, right? They have no transport. They have no rent to pay, because they are provided with what we call live-in. You stay at work, you are not paying rentals elsewhere. There are many domestic workers who are in this category, hence we are speaking for them. But they are not documented, they do not have special permits, right? So this domestic worker who is now earning 18 rand, which is below minimum wage, right? Because the argument is that we are advocating for the scratching of the minimum wage. No. Now, he earns 18 rand as opposed to 25 rand. So he collects, if he works for 8 hours, 6 days, 3,456. Compared to her counterpart, who does not stay at work, who earns 4,800. So the difference between the live-in domestic worker who's now earning below the minimum wage, earning 18 rand per hour, is 1,344 rands, right? That is the difference. This live-in domestic worker does not have to worry about transport, does not have to worry about the rentals because they stay at the workplace. Now, this is where then it becomes tricky. From our study and experience is that once this domestic worker undocumented stays at the workplace, the agreement is that they work for 8 hours, they are paid 18 rand an hour, which a month end they collect 3,456 without worrying about transport, without worrying about the rentals. In some cases, meals are provided at work, though others they will buy their own meals. This person then end up being abused on the basis that they do not have permits, right? Instead of working for 8 hours, they end up working for 15 hours. And the money does not go up. They are restricted in terms of their movement because they do not have permits. The middle class, both black and white, can only afford to pay them between 16 rand to 18 rand an hour, which is below minimum wage. But this then gets compensated in that transport is no longer required, right? And then transport is no longer required, accommodation is no longer required. So there's no expense for transport and accommodation. So we just needed to clarify this so that because others are now saying McBain and the African Diaspora Forum are now advocating for the scratching of the minimum wage. We are saying they stay at the workplace. The employer, who's a black or white middle class, says, I can pay you between 16 and 18 rand per hour, factoring in the issues of transport and accommodation. We are not saying a domestic worker who is not staying at the workplace should then be paid a minimum wage, below the minimum wage, collecting 18 rand per hour when they've got transport and accommodation costs on their income, which they subtract from their income. That's not what we're advocating for, right? And of course, there are many employers in the domestic sector, those that have money, they've been taking their domestic workers for holidays. Others, they are paying air tickets for their domestic workers when they go for holidays. For holidays in Zimbabwe, we've seen quite a number of them doing that, and we appreciate. And there are many that pay above the minimum wage. We appreciate that, but there's then this grouping of workers that it does not have permits in South Africa. They run the risk of being arrested. The employer says they cannot afford the minimum wage, but they can afford 18 rand an hour on condition that you will stay at the workplace. So the worker will then have to do mathematics. I'm not good in mathematics to say, if I stay at my place, I will pay rent. This is so much that I will pay. I will pay transport. This is so much. So from the 4,800, this is what I will be left with. Then this one will say, I will then have to give up my accommodation. I will stay at work. I will take 18 rand per hour. I will not have I will not have transport. So month end, I will have 3,456 rands. Then I'm able to send my kids in Zimbabwe every month 2,000 rands for their schooling and other expenses. Please share your views, write in the comment section, but do not insult us. It's a proposal. No one said the government of South Africa is going to grant this proposal. We are making a proposal, and we are saying if the Department of Labor agrees with us to say, well, it's a working proposal, we'll be glad. But if they say, no, we can't accept this, again, it's fine. There is no sin in making a proposal. Otherwise, goodbye.